the 8th day of December. It's 2024. I'm going to be your host tonight. I'm Dana. Hope you're doing well. You can call in at 709-589-4406 on this Sunday wintry day. Looks like we're all systems go. All systems are go. Almost, anyway. What I got to start doing is start the show a few minutes early. Because it always takes me a minute or so. Because I got to do everything myself, right? I don't have a team or nothing to, like, on hand, right, to help me. Futaba, which is right, you can see the nuclear meltdowns from Futaba. So now they're trying to manipulate and deceive and coerce and trick the unsuspecting tourists, which they managed to increase over the last number of years through a pretty insidious routine. We have a poll tonight helped to articulate what that issue is. Should it be a crime to manipulate people into visiting a deadly radioactive nuclear wasteland? Should that be a crime? Because currently it's not a crime to poison you with anthropogenic man-made radiation. If it was, they couldn't murder you and your loved ones in the hospitals, right? Because that's what they're doing in the hospitals. Worldwide, nuclear is an actual murder machine. There's no other weapon out there that comes close to killing humans in history as the nuclear industry's medical and radioactive fallout has accomplished. All the wars combined are laughable compared to what the nuclear industry got done to us. And there's nothing funny about it, obviously. Brian Thompson from UnitedHealthCare insurance company was assassinated. We don't know. I mean, there's only $10,000 reward for the shooter. He was worth $100 million. And dead man tell no tales, I suppose, right? So there's another way to look at it. There's a lot of controversies around the so-called suspect, different jackets, different backpacks. When he left the park, allegedly he didn't even have a backpack. The New York park. There's a lot of just bizarre connotations around this. There's a lot of people that are calling him a hero. The healthcare system's kill ratio is 30%. So 30% of the people that pay into the healthcare, 32 is that? I think it is, doesn't get any healthcare or delayed, and because they're dying, right? So they're the easiest one to deny is the ones who are dying. France's government has failed again. We're going to get to those stories and more coming up. Canada's got another big gun grab. They're going to send the weapons to Ukraine. The criminals are not going to turn their guns in. Canada is probably the most unsafest country on the planet. When you put it to the, I don't know about that statement, Dana. That's true. It's a very dangerous country because the population, with so many invaders now imported into the country, right? The crime rate has gone nuts. I mean, yes, no, I shouldn't have said it's the most dangerous country, clearly. But it's not exactly a safe country anymore. The town of 150 residents wants the world to know it's welcomed to a nuclear wasteland is absurd. Futaba's got around 15 million one-ton bags of top radioactive topsoil that they picked up. There's another 15 million that is missing. They had 30 million. Nobody knows where the other 15 million went. This is one of their pictures. I'm going to be showing you a lot of my pictures to help articulate the story coming up here. Hope everybody's doing well. James Lucid got a really good song out. It's an amazing song he put out. I put a link to it in the description under the video for later. And hi everybody. Let's get after this. We got quite a lot of stories to try to get through. Over tourism in Japan. Over tourism. This is the strangest statement imaginable because Japan, the entire country, is a nuclear wasteland. It's an absurd amount of nuclear fallout that is probably never going to stop on top of that because the reactors are still melting down. But the original emissions were, we've never seen these kind of emissions, radioactive fallout before. Over-tourism in Japan has been a major point of tension, even outright conflict in 2024. Over-tourism. They spent billions of dollars to manipulate people to come in and eat radioactive food and to artificially inflate the number of people visiting a nuclear wasteland, which lulled a lot of complacent people into moving there because they thought statistically it was a safe place when it simply never can be and never will be. And none of the tens of thousands of homeless that worked there had suits like that. They had paper suits. What if those tours could help local communities rebrand, regroup, and regrow? But in order to get there, you got to drive past where they picked up 30 million one-ton bags of radiation in just 3% of the land. See, people got short memories. We're almost 14 years now. It'll be 14 years in March of 2025. And regrow. So you're talking about Futaba. Futaba is joined on to the nuclear meltdown. It's a little community on the north side, and on the south side is Okuma. And both of these communities are split down the middle, sharing the nuclear power plant on their borders that have 36 reactor cores have melted down on. They successfully covered it up. We'll show you some of that information coming up. But the radioactive fallout was something that pre-Fukushima you wouldn't even see in Hollywood as a fictional story. Journalists and academics have been bought off, and that's why you're seeing these types of stories. That's the thinking of a small seaside town of Futaba, Fukushima Prefecture, located a few hours north of Tokyo. It's 240 kilometers north of Tokyo. But it's a nuclear wasteland when they picked up 30 million one-ton bags, but they never stopped harvesting food. And a lot of places where they're harvesting food, they never even picked up the alleged 2-centimeter topsoil. Go out with a shovel the next time you're out in the garden. Take a shovel and try to scrape up 2 centimeters of topsoil. Tell me how impossible that actually really is. That's how they were able to spread it over such a big distance. Of the alleged cleanup was saying that they cleaned up the 2 top centimeters. It's less than an inch. And that's not a definition of cleaning up after a nuclear accident. If you dig up you should dig up the top 3 feet of soil across the entire country, knock down every community, every tree, and abandon it for 1 million years, then come back. Maybe repopulate it at that stage. But until then, it's unconscionable to consider living there. or certainly eating the food or drinking the water, or breathing the air. The area has an ancient history, that'll last a billion years because of radiation emissions. And the problem with the anthropogenic man-made radiation is there's nothing on the planet has an autoimmune trigger to defend against it. There's nothing. No birds, insects, there's nothing. No humans. Your body attacks white blood cells for the rest of your life. So there's a real tangible catastrophic health effect for all species, not just humans. The 2011 Great East Japan, the Great East, why would you call it something like the Great East Japan earthquake? And the subsequent meltdowns, it's very unusual to use the S in that word, at the very same nuclear plant transformed the town once more. In the intervening years, the residents of Futaba had demonstrated remarkable resilience in reconciling with their new reality. Like, what are you talking about? My goodness. Resilience. People that were tricked and deceived and manipulated and coerced, hoodwinked, into going back into a nuclear wasteland don't quantify a statement like resilience. And this is the beach at Futaba. You can see the ongoing nuclear meltdowns. Just the evaporation from the ocean every day into the community is catastrophic, the anthropogenic man-made radiation. Hope alone may not be enough to restore the community's previous prosperity, but what about hope tourism? Hope tourism. I mean, these are maniacs. Really, these are maniacs. Hope tourism. Come on down to the nuclear wasteland. Everybody's friendly. It's not a crime to do this to you, but it is a crime, right? But it's not on the books as a crime, but it's 100% of a crime. You can't go there without ending up eventually getting sick from that exposures. And like if you go into Futaba as a tourist, when you come out, you should throw away all your clothing, your cameras, your phone. You should shave your head, your eyebrows. You should scrub yourself for hours and hours and hours. Because of the radiation. But you can't get what you breathed in. You can't get what you consumed, what you drank or eat. And just because you have people that are uneducated and that are there, that doesn't mean it's safe. Just because people are tricked and deceived and manipulated and coerced into going into a nuclear wasteland doesn't mean that it's safe or it's not just cancer you got to worry about. There's so many illnesses and diseases. On a sunny afternoon, November the 1st, I ascend the concrete seawall along the Futaba coastline and walk for a few minutes. This is a writer in this story. The media is really good at using a foreign journalist, for instance, to most likely never went there in the first place, never even seen Japan ever. Will write the story, then the media will publish it as an impartial investigative journalism, so to speak. So, like, the thing with radiation, you can walk the shorelines, absolutely, but you can't smell the radiation, you can't see it, or feel it, or hear it, or taste it, or touch it, or perceive it, right? The journalist's job is to politely cut your throat, and it could take a decade for the implications to manifest. Later, I take a leisurely stroll towards the train station past fields of Chinese silvergrass billowing in the unseasonably warm breeze. So you go, the train station should have never been open. It was only opened to bring in the homeless and the destitute and the victims of society because you're within a couple of kilometers of the nuclear meltdowns. And that's the only people who's going there is the destitute and the victims of society. I really... I really fail to see how these people can call themselves humans. It's pretty rare to see their name attached to these stories, by the way. They do show you this picture in particular. Near the station is the Futaba Art District. Now, we covered that many years ago, where they convinced artists, they gave them money, transportation, brought them into Futaba, where they done murals, paintings on businesses' walls and public walls, and then they got the hell out of there and never went back. And then calling that an art district is probably the craziest statement imaginable. Whoever wrote the story should be locked up with a drip in their arm for the rest of their lives at least. They're very dangerous people. The murals depict smiling faces and hopeful slogans in English. Why are they targeting the English? Why would they put... Because that's what they're targeting for tourists, right? Imagining harvesting food in a nuclear wasteland and you're too stupid to appreciate that. You're bombarded with so much propaganda, somehow you're able to switch off reality. Here we go. That's these big murals in a nuclear wasteland where only the most complacent of complacent have went back to. He said he came to Futaba for the Japan Writers' Conference. I never got his name. I don't think his name is anywhere in the story. Japan's Writers' Conference is in Futaba? In a nuclear wasteland? Right alongside of ongoing nuclear meltdowns? That doesn't make any sense. How can a journalist be lulled into that kind of environment? Right? I can't rationalize that. I can see him faking the story, but I can't see him actually going there. Why would you go to a nuclear wasteland? Spending my first night at the only lodging in town, an unassuming business hotel conveniently located near the Futaba Business Innovation Community Center, where the so-called Writers' Conference took place. There's a picture of him there. In the near future, it'll look like that. That's their seawall. They got somebody on the seawall. Now he's allegedly, I guess that's him. Because he's better than everybody else. He can't get radiation sickness because he's a journalist, right? So I doubt highly this, whoever it is wrote the original story, actually went there. This year's Japanese Writers' Conference was co-hosted by the Futaba Area Tourism Research Association. Tourism research. And see, the more people you bring into the nuclear wasteland, you can use those numbers then to convince people that it ain't so bad. And they might even be stupid enough to bring their children there and end up with permanent, lifelong, debilitating illnesses and diseases. Promotes the region as a site for educational visits and regenerative tourism. I was so angry when I was reading the story. That if I had seen a nuclear scientist, I probably would have kicked the shit out of him the minute I seen him. Promotes the region as... That's a lie. I wouldn't do that. I'm not like that, but I would have wanted to. I would have called him a scumbag for sure. Promotes the region as a site for educational visits. Promote the region as a site for educational visits. Think about a statement on regenerative tourism. So anybody who's dumb enough to go to Japan is certainly going to be dumb enough to go to Fukushima too. But why do that? Why stoop that low? Why hurt people? Why hurt people for the rest of their lives for a friggin' paycheck? Why do something like that? Why cross that particular line And what is wrong with someone that does that? If they're actually an academic, they should lose their degree, shouldn't they? They should be locked up for a minimum of 10 to 30 years for the first offense. The team was scheduled to lead a walking tour of Futaba during the Japanese Writers' Conference. The team was scheduled to lead a walking tour of a nuclear wasteland. And these are supposed to be writers. Yeah, we were at a nuclear wasteland. It was amazing. There was nobody there. No birds, no insects. More than 10 years before anyone could officially return to live in Futaba. It would take more than 10 years. It'll take more than thousands of years. Just because scumbags, degenerates, says it's okay, that doesn't mean it's okay. Will we ever draw a line for the nuclear industry? They'll cross it right away too. But will we ever draw a line where we say this is crazy? Because we currently don't have a line that says this is crazy for the nuclear industry. And as such, they're intent on destroying every species on the planet. Even today, there's only 150 suckers, roughly 2% of the town's population. The majority of them have never lived there. The majority of these people are the homeless and the destitute are working at the nuclear wasteland itself. They don't have any option but to stay in that little shithole, that little disease factory known as Futaba. Only 50% of the land has been decontaminated. You can't decontaminate land. It's not 15%, it's 3% of the land where they picked up the so-called topsoil. And that don't quantify as decontamination, okay? You have to take all the roads, all the sidewalks, all the houses, all the trees, everything in that community and dig down deep and then abandon it. But the problem is right alongside of a few kilometers away, you still got ongoing nuclear meltdowns. And the problem with this stuff is it's 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. It's like explosions going off in your cells, blowing hole in your chromosomes, your DNA, and causing permanent lesions to your organs before everything else gets foobarred. So 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. And what? You're going walking around in a nuclear wasteland? Eating the food, drinking the water, breathing the air? And you think that you're immune, that only you, everybody else can get sick, but you can't because you're a journalist or you're pro-nuclear stupid. A central facility in Futaba is the Great East Japan Earthquake and Nuclear Disaster Memorial Museum. They built a $50 million museum there a few years ago. It opened in 2020. It houses an impressive array of 150,000 artifacts and multimedia information displays about the region in both Japanese and English, and the bulk of which are dedicated to 3/11 and its aftermath. There's the museum there. That was a $50 million building. $50 million. A couple of kilometers away from ongoing perpetual nuclear meltdowns. Perpetual emissions. Why would you, where is the rationale? And you can blame every academic on the planet, every nuclear scientist on the planet has never spoken out. Not a nuclear scientist on this entire planet has ever spoken out. Here's an interesting story, though, from 2019, the year before the museum officially opened. So they knew they were building the museum, right? It's a $50 million facility. It took a long time to build it. So in 2000, it opened in 2020. But in 2019, this story shows up. 42 communities tossed out the records of the earthquake and the radiation. 42 of the nearby communities. The museum wouldn't take it. The municipalities, Iwate, Miyagi, Fukushima prefecture itself, reported throwing out the records. The records. what would be the one thing you would want for the museum about the earthquake and the tsunami and the meltdowns? Wouldn't it be the records? Wouldn't that be the one thing you would want in the museum? If you're going to have 150, 160,000 items there, wouldn't this be one of the top ones you would want? The documents that have already been discarded, including notifications from the central government and a list of names of volunteers and workers. You know, the victims, right? The Miyagi prefecture said the preservation period had expired. We don't have space to preserve all the documents, but the radiation not going to go anywhere for millions of years. You have all these ghost towns you could have stored it in. Back to the story. It is undeniable that the triple disaster majority impacted Futaba, and its consequences are still felt nearly 14 years later. As they acknowledged in the story, the most they could have cleaned up was 15% of the community. So the other 85% is off limit. It's a no-go zone. It's a nuclear wasteland. But the reality of it is you can't clean up a fraction of a nuclear meltdown area and expect that area not to be recontaminated immediately within 24 hours. And that the people who done it, we have never heard from the people who do it, this alleged cleaning up. There's no corporations, there's no nuclear industry, no academics, no institutions, no universities articulating it or coming out and explaining it or anything. So we got to take the pro-nuclear government's word on every facet of the story. The air, 150 kilometers away from Futaba, which is the same spot as the nuclear disease factory itself, Fukushima Daiichi, is as radioactive as the areas close to the meltdown. So how can it be safe right alongside the nuclear meltdown when it's not safe 150 kilometers away? Regenerative tourism, or hope tourism, as the prefectural government has branded the effort. And Ichibori is the governor of Fukushima Prefecture. He's one of the most worst criminals in history. Ultimately, when the truth gets told, he'll be known as one of the worst criminals in history. As the government has branded the effort, hope tourism, hope that the people don't see my video. Or hear James Lucett's music. Because James has got some kick-ass music going on now. He's gotten the kinks out of it. He's got over 180 songs. Ultimately, it'll probably be his music that wakes up the planet and not my presentations. And I don't care how it works, as long as it works. This is a plume model covering the planet based on 26 days, but right alongside the detonations, and the fuel would have fell in Fukushima Prefecture, or Futaba community itself. It's such a heartbreaking story to me. Is one way to help shift the narrative. Hope tourism is one way to shift the narrative. Oh, we went to the nuclear meltdowns and it's just like a banana, Dana. And you tell me the best spot for them people to sleep is on the highways. Because the drivers are always looking for sleeping people and they won't run them over, right? Because pro-nuclear would probably told people that, actually. By the way, this is only 2 of the 4 reactors that lost their entire inventories. And the reactors themselves are 100 Chernobyls each. At the top of the buildings was 8 more reactors. So 800 Chernobyls. So 900 Chernobyls per building, basically. Because pure uranium, pure plutonium. And that Medusa reactor to your left, reactor 3. By the way, these were 190-foot, 65-meter, 19-story buildings. And the inventories, decades of reactor cores were stored at the top of the buildings. They're gone. successfully covered up. In fact, as of August 24th, 2023, last year, International Atomic Energy Agency says that never even happened. You can go to TEPCO and get those pictures yourself. But officially, it never happened. As of last year. Thanks to the nightmare that is UN. Today, Futaba is part of the Fukushima Innovation Coast Framework, a government-led initiative to make inroads in the aerospace robotics, and medical. Why would you put a medical industry in a nuclear wasteland for? Aerospace, robotics, and medical. It's designed, right, that people start hearing Fukushima and associated with aerospace, robotics, and medical industries and start subconsciously conflating it with something good when it has no redeeming qualities, period, and never can and never will. Radiation and health specialists, children with over 11 atoms a kilogram of cesium, because apparently uranium, plutonium, and americium, neptunium, strontium, and 1,000 other fission products is only existing in every other reactor on the planet, but not Japan's. Japan refuses to acknowledge anything but cesium. Well, that's not true, but 99 out of 100 stories, they'll only acknowledge cesium, which is a gamma, which pulses energy 600 feet, so it's 100% a disaster. But to omit the enormity, the biggest byproduct of radiated fuel rod is the curium isotopes, not cesium. And curium is just, it's a monstrosity because it never goes away. And all fuel hemorrhage curium into the local environment and worldwide. And the local environment is always, the majority of all nuclear power plants are surrounded by farms, symmetrically worldwide. And children with just a tiny, tiny amount, so tiny, it's not, like 11 atoms, my Geiger counter is clicking away at 220 counts per minute. 11 counts per minute, slash 11 becquerels, slash 11 atoms. Because in order for the becquerel to exist, you got to have something to make the becquerel. The becquerel is the explosion, the decay, so-called decay. It's not a decay, it's an explosion. It might do explosions for 1 billion years, so how can you conflate that with the word decay? Right? It's a psychological war against common sense. And these are not decays, these are harmful explosions that damage everything with replicating cells. To call them decays is to play into the industry's narrative that will make you stupider instead of enlightening you. So children with over 11 atoms a kilogram of cesium, or alphas, or betas, or neutrons, and just to only use cesium, a gamma, is again, this is unconscionable to see heart problems. 50 atoms a kilogram is, so the atom will pulse a becquerel, an explosion, every second. And wherever the cesium, there's infinitely more curium, plutonium, and americium, and uranium, and everything else. You cannot have one without all the others. It simply doesn't, that's the real way it works. You can't have one without all the others. So if you see cesium, then you need to multiply it by around 600 to get the true number. Over the past year, Futaba has hosted a street performance festival. We covered everything here we're talking about. I covered as it happened. A gourmet fair, a lantern exhibition, multiple days of a Golden Week, which time of rice celebration, and a 3/11 memorial event, and a candlelight night of reading and musical performances. So just because they spent copious amounts of money to make this happen doesn't mean it was safe. It doesn't mean that anybody went there ended up not being damaged for the rest of their life. And while it might take many years for that manifest, or many days, you got to be exceptionally evil to participate in this kind of deceit and dishonesty and murder. This is murder. There's no other word really to describe what they're doing. This is murder. You don't die right away, you die later, but it's still murder. Catching fish in a nuclear wasteland. Like, people give the Japanese too much credit. They're actually not that smart at all. If they were, they would never let anybody go into a nuclear wasteland, and they would hold this disgusting, this unconscionable industry accountable, wouldn't they? The Fukushima Reconstruction Memorial Park, directly east of the stupidest museum in human history, is expected to be completed in 2025. Fukushima reconstruction. You can't reconstruct a nuclear wasteland. These are insane people. Usually it's 1 in a million children have thyroid tumors. In 2012, the next year, not only was there 865,000 extra cancers, and not everybody has health care, not everybody was diagnosed, and cancer isn't the only illness or disease that you got to worry about by a long shot. And cancer is typically latent. So there's 865,000 excess cancers in the first year, but there was also 358,000 out of a million children with thyroid tumors. Because when you scale it up, it was 1 in a million. Now it's 35.8%. So if you looked at the big population, every child is going to have a tumor on their thyroid. And then the thyroid, of course, produces the hormones. And children are developing, so they need an incredible amount of hormones and not radioactive ones. And it's the same for the birds and insects, mammals and animals. It's an industry that you got to fight back with every fiber in your body. And they have the universities, they have all the mainstream media, they have all the media weaponized against common sense. Whether you're a long-term resident of Japan or flying in for a holiday, the message is clear. The nuclear wasteland and the monsters welcome you. Journalists are the very last ones you can trust. Academics are the very last ones you can trust. That's the takeaway from now 13 years of Fukushima. Is the worst humans ever created are academics and journalists. The government couldn't get away with it without their help. In times about misinformation, quality journalism is more crucial than ever. So imagine writing a story so insidious and monstrous that you're guaranteed to kill many people, many hundreds of thousands of people, because they're going to go into the nuclear wasteland and eventually get sick and die from that. And then call yourself a journalist. Half of Japan to be covered in nuclear waste. 60 and older should be prepared to die at the Fukushima plant. The official 311 notebook. Half of Japan to be covered. If the entire country was covered. Let's deviate for a few moments. I want to bring up a few other stories. We'll get back into nuclear. The Canadian government is banning more guns, and they're going to send them to Ukraine. They make them illegal so they can confiscate them, and then they send them to Ukraine. It's absurd. With crime rates skyrocketing, people need to be able to protect themselves. By the time the police show up, if you're lucky enough to call them before the criminal kills you and your family, by the time he shows up, you're going to be dead anyway. And the idea of guns wasn't per se so much so you can go hunting and fishing or protect yourself. it was so you can protect yourself from the government. So the government would have to worry about taking away your country from you and everybody in your country. President Emmanuel Macron has plunged France into chaos. Now, France is one of the stupidest things imaginable, where they have a president and a prime minister. Well, and so the president stays the president, but prime ministers come and go, come and go, come and go, come and go. Sometimes every couple of months. Blame his mistakes on the prime minister, the current, latest, greatest prime minister, and when they have a vote of no confidence, this creature is still going to be able to destroy your country. By the way, the French nuclear test, if you want to call it a test, that was a nuclear war. Any nuclear detonations is a nuclear war. It's the same weapon. It's the same radioactive failure. The French's attack upon the French Polynesians was equal to a Nagasaki bomb a week for 12 years. French nuclear tests exposed the entire Polynesian population to radiation. Everybody got sick, and everybody born there is sick, born sick. The lawmakers have toppled the government for the first time since 1962. The whole government has voted a non-confidence. This is the third government of 2024, and 12 weeks after it had been formed. Macron, who we've covered hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times over the last number of years since he showed up. He was elected president of France on the 7th of May 2017 with 66% of the votes in the second round. He just announced funding for 6 nuclear power plants, right? France doesn't have enough fresh water. 70% of their fresh water currently goes to the nuclear power industry. At the age of 39, became the youngest president in French history. This was probably the biggest mistake they've ever made, was hiring Macron. And he was elected to a second term in 2022. France's government collapsed. Michel Barnier resignation makes him the shortest serving prime minister. You got a prime minister and a president. There's an extra 1,000 ways that's going to go wrong. He ruled out resigning. The president addressed the nation last night saying, "You have given me a democratic mandate of 5 years and I'll carry it out till full term." He's not stepping down. Three governments and he still won't step down. 3 governments overturned, he won't step down. Who do you think is behind that kind of legacy? It's destroying stability. France's tech sector reels after the Barnier government collapse, which means that their financing is not going to be approved for 6 nuclear power plants anyway. We'll miss the technology train if we miss this one today. France's government collapse this week has destroyed the confidence that the country's technology innovation sector has taken years to build. There is no technology industry in France. France is one of the most stupidest, unconscionably stupidest countries in history. It's let me come back over to the poll for a minute. Should it be a crime to manipulate people into visiting a deadly radioactive nuclear wasteland? Somebody said no. Why would somebody say no? Why would you not consider that a crime? And we got 27 votes which is crazy, right? The spammers will show up soon enough, I guess. The French government collapse this week has destroyed the confidence that the country's technology and innovation sector has taken years to build. One European, a single startup. Why would you look at a single startup narrative? That's an interesting framing, isn't it? One European startup organization, which is no doubt small modular reactors. Michel Barnier resigned as Prime Minister following a vote of no confidence by members of Parliament on Wednesday after he pushed through the first part of the country's budget without a vote in the lower house of France's Parliament. He pushed through the first part of the country's budget. Now, you got to have the Parliament, the lower house Parliament, have their say in that. He just went ahead and done it. And that was funding for 6 nuclear power plants. That's why he done it. It leaves France without a government just 1 month to pass the budget for next year. Oh, I'm sure the scumbags will figure out a way around it. Macron refuses to step down. Vows to name a new French prime minister. And so the French president names the prime minister. The prime minister, 3 already in 2024. This will be number 4. And so he's failed the country horrifically 3 times this year. The governments have basically now been dissolved. A complete no confidence vote, including his party voted as no confidence. Yet he's still in power. You really got to get rid of prime ministers and presidents in your countries. They're the worst thing can happen to a country if somebody wills that kind of enormous amount of power. In a 10-minute address to the nation, so you get a 10-minute address, and then he wanders off and gets on private planes and flies around the planet pretending that he's some kind of hero. He rejected opposition's pressure to stand down. Really, he appointed each of the prime ministers. Like typically, you have a president or a prime minister. You don't have 2. And you certainly don't have one that's unassailable, that's untouchable. That's the epitome of stupid. He was holding talks on Friday with leaders of the Socialists said they were ready for a compromise in forming a fixed-term government, but not under a prime minister from a right-wing party like Nutjob. It is the president in France who chooses the prime minister who then runs the government. It's, my goodness. That's truly one of the most evil facets that you could have in a government, is that particular setup, isn't it? 331 MPs voted in support of the motion against the current prime minister, far more than the 288 required. Plus, France's successful hosting of the 2024 Olympics was proof that we can do great things. Like, what are you talking about? The world admires you for that. The scandals, the boxing, you had male boxers, right, claiming that they identify as a female, beating the shit out of the female Olympic boxers who have worked their entire life for that moment. And then they change the rules. Males comes in, claims that they identify as a female, and knocks out. And you remember the stories, we covered it, where the female boxer said in all of her years of boxing, she's never been hit with that kind of power before. And then you see him prancing around, the males prancing around. They had a guy who raped a 12-year-old girl, sentenced to 4 years in jail for it, in the Olympics in France, because France has no moral compass. Marathon swimmers events taking place in the Seine. They spent $1.4 billion to clean up the river that you can't clean up. I mean, they have got catacombs under that city with millions of dead people in it. Where did all the money go? Because $1.4 billion, you could have cleaned up the river if you tried. Olympic organizers apologized and say the Last Supper drag tableau was a message of love. They took the sacrosanct Last Supper and turned it into a gay orgy. What was the point of that, though? Why go after the Christians and the Catholics, which is a huge population, multi-billions of people on the planet that practice that? Why go after them? And why have such a pagan... But then they got the arrogance, this absurd amount of arrogance and hubris to claim that they're admired worldwide. The world come out and blasted them worldwide. They even had kids on stage. Like, in all honesty, to come out, and let me go back to one more time. France successfully hosting the 2024 Olympics were proof we can do great things. They had no air conditioning for the athletes who needed to be in peak performance to perform, and then had to go up against males in the female competitions, because France is better than everybody. It's like, my goodness. And then they got a president they can't get rid of, and that appoints prime ministers to be the fall guy. And they've already had 3 prime minister fall. They're worse than Japan. Norman and the Nerd, Google insider spills beans on how the quest for clean nuclear energy went ballistic at one of the world's largest technology companies with a weird detour via cold fusion. So Google, which is where we're streaming now, Alphabet, is pro-nuclear, more pro-nuclear than people realize. And they use their artificial intelligence to help the nuclear industry in so many ways. And there's not very many dissenting voices of pro-nuclear, right? And then you look at the censorship on me, 17 viewers. On a show I've been doing for over a decade, 17 viewers. 20 thumbs up. The U.S. federal government committed billions to support the next wave of nuclear reactors, including small modular reactors. Don't exist when geothermal exists. If they spent the same money on the geothermal, we wouldn't have an issue. If they took the money they burnt in just 1 year on gave away for small modular reactors worldwide and fusion, we would have geothermal everywhere worldwide, and would have displaced all gas, oil, and coal. And we can do the whole thing in about 10 years. We can build a whole infrastructure if we wanted to. If we went ahead and done it, the geothermal technology is everywhere. Or geothermal is everywhere. Notably, Google recently signed an agreement to purchase nuclear power from small modular reactors. It doesn't even exist, though. So why would you ignore, and why would you, like, they even talk about batteries, why would you talk about stuff that doesn't work rather than stuff that does work? And why would you censor the very small handful of people that are rational? In the realm of nuclear fusion, which doesn't exist, Google combined, and they've been at it for, well, the designs they're using are 104 years old or something. That's the people who originally wrote the papers on it. They're still using those papers. Combined its computing powers with plasma research at the TAE Technologies. Imagine if Google took the same software to crack geothermal and how to drill the last mile. Do you think they would have solved that? You know they will. And there are companies out there that have solved it. Right there, one company, Quatsi Electric, is using 25,000 pounds per square inch water jets to cut up the deep, hard rocks. And then they're using pneumatic hammers to pound whatever is left over into pulp, and then the drill bit goes down through that. But the funding they get is next to nothing. And then the storage, there's endless amounts of storage. Like sand. You can heat sand to 700 degrees and it'll retain it for months. You can take lava rocks from all the earth. Like Iceland produces so much lava rocks, because lava rocks will hold 3,000 degree Fahrenheit temperature for many months. Over and over and over. It's easy to heat it up and it'll store the energy, and that energy can be converted. Instead, they're looking at large batteries, which is just, why would you do that? There's big windmills, those great big massive windmills that only compress air. And so you can dig a bunch of mine shafts and compress air down in that. And then the energy, the heat created by compressing the air could be stored in sand or stored in lava rocks. We've identified over 20 different storage techniques that are available right now. That they don't need to refine it hardly at all. If you use Google software to figure out any, right? But no, they won't do it. They'll just, only for something that doesn't exist, small modular reactors and fusion, even cold fusion. The scale of Google's ambition from transforming U.S. nuclear policy to leveraging machine learning and fusion and re-examining debunked science is absolutely ballistic. But they won't put that to work on renewable resources like geothermal. This unconventional journey reflects Google's broader philosophy. No idea is too big, too wild, or too controversial to explore, except for geothermal and renewable. Don't want to look at that. Not going to waste any computing power on that stuff. The nuclear industry has infiltrated everything on this planet and weaponized it against us, right? A Japanese actress dies at 54, and there's a crisis of people dropping dead in Japan. This was another interesting story. Robots to move radioactive sand and water from the Fukushima 1 nuclear plant basement, and the materials to be stored in metal containers. This is a crazy story. Togo Electric Power Holding Company Incorporation has decided to retrieve, now we've covered this years and years ago, the sandbags that were used to lower the radiation levels of water that was contaminated while cooling down the reactors. None of this is true, by the way. The procedure is aimed at reducing workers' exposure to radiation, thus allowing the decommissioning project to be sped up. And the company intends to start the removal of the sandbags. Now, they say there's around 1,300 sandbags, and they weigh about 26 tons altogether. They were placed on the basement floor of 2 facility buildings near the reactors buildings. And following the earthquake, there were meltdowns in number 1 to number 3 reactors. Well, reactor 4 melted down. And they successfully covered it up, but let me show you. Reactor 4 melted down. They won't acknowledge reactor 4. They talk about reactor 1 to 3. But they refuse to acknowledge reactor 4 melted down. Over 3/4 of the building is gone. and the reactors and the fuel pools were at the top of the building. The media behind me are pretending they're at the top of the building to your left, pretending they're 150 feet above the stump. And they've dug this hole now because he told so many lies for so long. Enormous amount of water was used in an attempt to cool the reactors down. Like, you can't contain the water because you're pouring it over nuclear meltdowns. It's multiple sieverts per liter. If you don't let it go straight out into the ocean, you can't get back on the site. So they let it go straight out into the ocean. You can't filter this kind of stuff. You can never walk over the pipes, and you can never change the filters. Once you turn the system on, you can never go in the building again. Near the building again, or near the pipes are going to be hundreds of sieverts. And they're only a quarter of an inch thick. They need to be 6 feet thick of lead to shield you from 100 feet away. Enormous amount of water was used in an attempt to cool the reactors, and the water used became highly contaminated, was stored in the basement floors of the two facilities. The basement floors. Again, this is simply not true. What the story is meant to help reinforce the fake narrative that nothing got into the ocean. That's like everything left the buildings. That's why the media is pretending they're in a building that don't exist. The plumes covered the planet. This model is only based on 20 days. Almost all the models are 20 to 30 days. They all show the same attributes. So much radiation, the only way to describe it is an extinction event. Enormous amount of water was used in an attempt to cool down the reactors. No, the reactors detonated. You can't cool down that when it detonates. And then the other thing would be that they cooled it down. That's what the alleged story is. But the buildings detonated, and the result was nothing left. It was all gone in just the first 6 days. Whatever was left went China syndrome deep into the earth, where it's always going to be hemorrhaging. This is just 2 of the 4 buildings that are gone. The reactors and the fuel pools are at the top of the buildings. So how is pouring water on that going to help when the reactor cores and the fuel pools with decades of reactor cores are already gone? Right, so you make up that narrative, right? Because the water is so highly radioactive, the zeolite sandbags were put in the water to lower the radiation levels. It doesn't work that way. They need to get rid of that story, so this is what they're doing here now. After being submerged, because this story is well known in the academic or in the nuclear movement, right? They need this story to go away. So after being submerged in the contaminated water for many years, the sandbags have degraded and now dangerously radioactive themselves. So they're saying there's 4.4 sieverts on the surface of the sandbags. Well, collectively, you got 1,200 sandbags or so. So 1,200 times 4.4 sieverts. By the way, 3 sieverts is a lethal dose to a human. Their organs start melting. And suggesting it's the maximum, you can't quantify those assertions. You can't go near this stuff. And they haven't provided any documentation on how they can quantify it. And then they go on with the normal lies of saying, which is enough to kill half the people exposed to it for 1 hour. 4.4 sieverts will kill you in about 4 minutes. You might not die for a couple hours, but you will die after 4 minutes exposures. And that's just one of the if you cut off the surface of the bag and brought it somewhere and you stood there for a couple of minutes. It kills the other half of the people a few hours later. So they want you to believe that the other half is going to survive that, because otherwise you know the homeless will never go there, right? You can never get anybody to go in there and do the dirty work for the nuclear industry if you say everybody's going to die. So by coming and saying half the people will die, the reality of this, the other half is going to die a few hours later. There's nobody on the planet with an autoimmune that can defend against this. There's no species on the planet. They really are just a despicable, disgusting, revolting, parasitic industry. Everybody that works in it has those particular attributes that they can't get a job there. For the retrieval, the remote control robot will go into the water to tear the bags and let the zellulite out. From 2025, another robot will be used to suck these robots. They spent $48 million on a robot that does this. Pinches. They call that a robot for some reason. Like really, if you any of these people, if you confront them, they will defecate in their pants and they'll reach down, they'll take it out and they'll smear it all over themselves so you'll get disgusted and leave them alone. I guarantee it. These are the most cowardly people conceivable. And they're the most despicable people conceivable too. Another robot will use to suck the zellulite with contaminated water through a pipe to the upper floor of the building and into metal containers that can shield against the radiation. Unless they're 6 feet thick, there's zero possibility they can shield. There's no shielding whatsoever. But what it is, none of this is going to take place. They just want the story to go away. So they're going to make up these elaborate hoaxes to make a story that's embarrassing to go away. Can be completed, but it's another way to suck money out of the taxpayers because it's never been done before, so the taxpayers got to pay for it. Although the work is scheduled to be completed by 2027, the decision to ultimately dispose of the containers has not yet been made. Just send it up to Ontario, Canada. They'll take it. There's nobody can stop them. The industry will do whatever it wants. Everybody's too cowardly to try to stop them. TEPCO succeeded in the test retrieval of a piece of nuclear fuel debris weighing 0.7 grams. It took them 4 years, $48 million to build a long pole that goes in, grabs a little piece, and then comes back. Like it's the size of a grain of rice we're talking about. Japan's population crisis, foreign farmers are helping keep agriculture alive. Foreign farmers. How bad can it be, I wonder? The number of young people in the rural areas is declining, hit by a falling fertility rate, which happens to be exactly what radiation does to any species, let alone humans. The government survey showed the number of farmers in Japan dropped by 360,000 since Fukushima to 2020. Conveniently, they put in 2010 because if you put in 2011, everybody's going to be like, right? But actually, they're talking about 2011 to 2020. They're talking about a 9-year period. Well, foreign-born farmers doubled. So that's quite an interesting statement. They got 360,000 farmers disappeared, and kids are not being born. Japan funeral industry is struggling to keep pace with the rising death. Struggling. They can't keep pace with it. People got to wait weeks and weeks to bury their loved ones because there's so many people dying they can't keep up with it. The highest number since statistics were first recorded in 1899. 1.56 million people died in Japan last year alone. In some cases, grieving families had to wait almost 2 weeks to put their loved ones to rest. And the number of deaths during the 2022 calendar year was up by 8.9% from the previous year. Well, what's the trigger? Fukushima? The leading cause of death is cancer. Oh, really? Cancer. Now we're talking about deaths, but just in the first year, the cancer center in Japan said the number of extra cancers rose by 865,000 a year after Fukushima. An extra 865,000 cancers. And now you have almost 400,000 people a year dying of cancer, which is almost 1/4 of the total people dying each year of cancers. Another major cause is heart disease. Really? Heart problems. Go figure, right? Of course, it's well known that death by heart attacks. Let me just grab it for you. Yeah, there. In fact, I got a whole folder just on heart attacks. Extreme increases of mortality by cardiac diseases in Fukushima. 2012. The death rates might give the creeps to some people. Number of deaths were up 12.5% compared to the same month of the year before. Same things with cancers and cardiac diseases up 14.5%. So you got heart attacks and death by heart skyrocketed. You got cancer skyrocketed. You got tumors in children skyrocketed from 1 in a million to 365,000 out of a million. 357,000 out of a million. 35.7%. 13,646 out of 38,000. It used to be 1 in a million pre-Fukushima. Congenital open heart surgery for congenital malformation is 14.2% per 100,000 live births in a 2019 study, which is 14,200 for every 100,000 children born. This is absurd numbers. When you start adding, this is by no means all of it. 6 in 10 children with diabetes. When you start putting it all together, everybody's sick, right? Pneumonia, which is notorious after Chernobyl and Fukushima, 74,000. And vascular brain diseases. Obesity rates doubled in the first year after Fukushima. And obesity is a marker of radiation brain damage / vascular brain disease. Doubled in the first year. And it's a marker of radiation brain damage, right? Japan unveils a draft measure to reverse falling birth rates. Like they try to cover up, they'll blame it on this and blame it on that. But the best one to blame it on is the facts. And when you start adding all the facts up, identifying fake news, how to spot disinformation, misinformation. Japan minister suggests regulating online disinformation. So then just get rid of all the media and universities, knock them offline, and the governments, and we won't have to worry about all the disinformation no more. 90% of the disinformation comes from academics and journalists. Tough challenges. Let's go back to 2019. Tough challenges on nuclear fuel removal. This is the same media. For the first time since the accident, workers have started removing fuel rods from one of the reactor buildings where a meltdown occurred. Because they don't count reactor 4 as a meltdown, see? This is reactor 3. The operation taking place in storage pools of Fukushima reactor 3, the plutonium mixed oxide reactor to your left. This is the official picture where they claim they're at the very top of the building, looking down at way above it, looking down at the fuel pool. But reactor 3 doesn't even exist. There's just that little stump. Same as reactor 4, the little stump where they pretend they're on top of the building and they claim there is no meltdown. There is no storage pool at reactor 3. The building doesn't exist. And the world is just, oh, well, have a nice day. Because their schools and universities made them so stupid. Really, like, it's just tough challenges on a nuclear fuel removal. This is the picture they had in that particular story. Look, tough challenges. Yeah, I guess so, eh? When the building doesn't exist. You got all the media coming out telling you they're getting fuel out of the pool, but when you look at the facts, you won't find this picture anywhere else. Because facts don't matter. The truth doesn't matter. I think it matters is the law. The law is the only thing that's important. Some Ignace residents still oppose the nuclear waste decision. There's a dead duck if there ever was one. Like, they're going to be transporting nuclear waste with no containment that is vented for 1,000 kilometers all day, every day. For what, 80 years? Through the most fertile farmlands on the planet. What do you think is going to happen for that? This story was despicable, by the way. It was really. This was unbelievably despicable. This person was a despicable betrayal. She served on the town council, so therefore, if she wants to get her paycheck from the Nuclear Waste Management Organization, she got to come out and look at all the Christmas lights and the Christmas trees, and it's meant to lull people. That's always weaponized, used to lull people into complacency. Ultimately, the nuclear waste at the nuclear waste repository they're going to build in Canada will melt down at some point, and then it'll erupt in pyrophoric explosions, and then you can never contain it. The emissions, you're putting all your eggs into one basket and then it's going to melt down. How can we be that stupid? Nobody's allowed to have a conversation. It's like Google got all this manpower it uses for fusion and small modular reactors, but it won't let geothermal or renewables near that so it can solve any issues. And then claim that they're totally open-minded, which is simply not true, is it? Nuclear can't touch anything without destroying it on top of that. So you're going to put all this nuclear waste in a hole in the ground. At some point that melts down. And it burns at 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures forever because it doesn't need oxygen. And they show you these stupid looking designs. 5.5 million bundles. Put all your nuclear waste in a big hole in the ground, and guess what happens? It all comes back forever and destroys all species. There is nothing can survive. And get a little hick town full of rednecks, throw money around for 14 years in an economically depressed area. And the only outcome is these are the people that are making the decisions instead of the country that has created the waste. It should have been a referendum Canadian-wide. And so the best way to destroy everything is put nuclear in it. It's the most efficient way to destroy the future of all 8 million species. It'll let stupid, ridiculously lethal nuclear like just the trucks on the highways are hemorrhaging radiation into the farmers' fields forever. And eventually everything dies on the side of the roads and all the fields, everything will be dead. And you won't see the dead bodies on the road, but they'll be out in the fields. The farmers and the people that are working in the fields will drop dead, but you won't see them on the side of the road. The radiation, you can't see it or smell it or hear it or feel it or taste it or touch it. You can't put it deep into the ground because it'll melt down. That's the consensus among anybody with half a brain, right? You don't need to be very smart to know. Once you learn the basics about this stuff, you know it'll all melt down at some point. It doesn't need oxygen to burn. And once it starts burning, everything else around it will burn. Because the temperatures we're talking about, it's just an evil, despicable, hateful industry. That's the best way to describe it. It's an industry of where they only hire the most dishonest and disingenuous and dangerous people. And it's easy. Journalists are greedy, right? The academics, the fishermen are stupid, bless their hearts. They don't know nothing about nuclear. You can convince them picking up a tiny fraction, 3% of the land, scratching up the topsoil somehow is decontamination. Because everybody gets bored and stops paying attention. It's a very difficult subject for the average person to understand it or comprehend it. And don't expect a journalist to come to your rescue. They bought and sold over and over and over. Their parents were scumbags. Their parents were scumbags. The fishermen are just fishermen. They're not nuclear scientists. They don't know the difference. The journalists do, the scientists do, but throw a bit of money their way and they'll sell their soul and yours and everybody else's. That's why they got the job in the first place. Because they had those particular attributes. I don't care about you or anybody else. The plumes are not just isolated to Japan. The plumes are worldwide. This is another model of the radioactive fallout covering the entire planet. I showed you the plutonium model from TEPCO's numbers. This is the Neptunium model, only based on 20 days. Same as that one, 20 days from the Norwegian Institute of Air Research. All the models are telling us the same story. The whole planet was contaminated in a month. The French's model is the most accurate ones. And it was based on 1 million to 10 million atoms of cesium-137 per cubic meter of air. And the model was based on 31 days. So when the model stops, you're talking about 31 days. The plume it covers the entire planet. It's like an invisible snowstorm that after 20, 30 days, this is 20 days in right there. Let me stop it right there. That's 20 days in. The plume covers the whole planet in 20 days. The entire planet. There's nowhere to go. So you're going to poison every insect, every bird, every animal, every mammal, every human, every child. You're going to contaminate all the water, all the food. And this is not an accident. They knew they were building on a fault line with 1,000 earthquakes a year in Japan. They knew they had a 3,000-year legacy of tsunamis. They went up to 300 feet. Not just 100, but 300 feet. And they knew this would happen eventually because prevailing winds, that's how it works. Gas, oil, and coal emissions don't make plumes like that, by the way. Those plumes only travel 20, 30 miles. And they grow trees and plants and animals and insects and humans. That's what carbon does. They want the carbon because they want it for their underground bunkers for 1,000 years or their space travel for 1,000 years or whatever. Carbon is not an issue. More carbon, the bigger the plants are. More carbon, the more people, the more insects, the more birds, the more animals, the more fish, the more whales. Carbon doesn't heat the planet. It's absurd to suggest that. You got an invisible plume pulsing energy at the speed of light every second for millions of years. What do you think is going to happen after 80 years, which is what we're looking at right now? Does anybody really think that all the nuclear weapons testing was actually nuclear testing? They were nuclear wars. They were poisoning the planet. They were destroying the fresh water. They attacked, what I find really interesting is they attacked the water. That's really clear when you're looking at the documentation. And so then you're left with a question. Why did they attack the water? Because the water, everything on the planet has to have water, right? But what is water, though? Water is life. Without water, we don't exist. Isn't that right? Would you build a house in a spot where there's no water? How long do you think you're going to last without water? 3 days or something? 4 days? Food, you can live for months. You're not going to be very healthy, but you can live for maybe a month or two. But without water, water is just magic. Water is, for all intents and purposes, water is God, right? And water responds to words. Water has memories. Water connects every species on the planet. We all perspire, we all urinate and everything else. We all drink and expel water. So theoretically, we're all connected. And the only thing that's in contact with all of us at one time is water. Water knows all of our darkest secrets, all of our goodest attributes. Water is throughout the universe on top of that. The comets you see, that's 1 million miles of ice water. Wherever there's water, there's life, right? That's how we know Earth, for instance. And we look for habitable planets. The first attribute is water, because you can make oxygen from water. And you can grow food, you can sustain life, and the list goes on, right? You can make fuel, the list is very long. But water is something we should cherish with every fiber in our body. And we do, whether we realize it or not. How many times have you been thirsty and drank a glass of water and said how much you appreciated that glass of water? Quite a lot of times, isn't it? Because subconsciously you knew that was really good for you. You might drink, have a beer, or you might have an orange juice or something like that, but it's not the same as water, is it? You still need water. Every plant, every tree, every insect, every bird has that. One thing in common is water. Yeah, water of life, that's right. James Lucid donated $270 on the weekend there. Bless your heart, my goodness, man. I really don't know what to say sometimes. We struggle and struggle. We barely keep this operation moving forward. And without this operation, there will be nobody filling in this gap, right? No one's ever done an educational program in history on nuclear. The most important educational program that I ever identified was on this subject, and we couldn't find anybody out there. There's lots of presentations, but they're all lawyers. Their job is to manipulate you. And I decided I'm not going to sit in silence anymore. And I'm going to start up a humble little show, a little presentation, and get out there and just educate whoever is willing to listen and hopefully influence the policymakers and the investors. And I'm sure we've done that. Should it be a crime to manipulate people into visiting a deadly radioactive nuclear wasteland? We got 21 viewers, bless your hearts, and 24 likes. We got 30 votes. That's okay. We're going to close it out with James Lucid's recent song. I think it's just amazing. I know, because I know music. And he put out this song as a mockery to the nuclear industry in one way, in many ways. And I would imagine a reminder to himself of how important his work is. He's definitely found his calling. I can tell you that much. Because music is something that resonates for everybody. And we've been having a few problems on James's song. in the last couple of weeks, there's 3 great songs that we tried to play that got, even my last show on Thursday, I couldn't play the song. And so tonight we're going to try again. And I don't know why. I've never had an issue before, but I don't know why that is happening. But it's 3 times. In fact, James' song that we're going to play tonight in a moment, I had to thumbs up and refresh the page. It didn't give him a thumbs up. I had to do that 3 times on his nuclear industry PR crisis point. This is an amazing song. And if you really like this, and you'll like his the Meltdown Queen songs. He's got quite a few. The Nuclear Jamaica's another really. All of them are great, right? We like, each of us like different genres, right? He's got endless genres in all of his music. We're going to play that one right there. And we'll see everybody tomorrow night. If people want to donate, for goodness sakes, please consider donating. Links are in the bottom of my description, directly to the 2 ways, PayPal and my website, to donate to me. We've never had a hitch, and that site's been there almost 11 years. We've never had an issue. And everything helps. You'd be surprised. You know, there's a motor, a 300 horsepower motor, 300. Mercury motor, outboard motor, at the auction block for $1,800. It's got like 10 hours left before it's too far away for me to get to right now. But for $300, I could have a $30,000 motor for my boat, and I need a motor for my boat, right? My 115 has gone kaput on me this summer, and we tried to revive it. I'm not having no luck. It's an old motor, been to Alaska 6 times. And so it ran its course, unfortunately. And my boat can handle a 300 horsepower too, right? And I was like, I literally got sick to my guts, because nobody uses that auction set. I usually got sick to my guts when I seen that motor. I was like, I'll never have it, even though that would be you can do some serious research with a motor like that. All right, let's play this nuclear industry public relation crisis. And I'm going to adjust the music in real time for you on my end. We should be okay right there. Have a great night. We'll see everybody on the next show. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up if you make us this far. Hugs for you and your friends and your families and your loved ones.
Good afternoon, team. This call is classified. Let's address the situation at hand. James Lucid has over 1,500 subscribers and climbing. His content is eroding public trust and, frankly, our patience. It's worse than we thought. Meltdown Queen is being played in public spaces, gyms, grocery stores, even DOE parking lots. People are humming it. Humming. It's just noise. People like catchy songs. They're not listening to the actual message. He's not a threat. Not a threat! Number 1 and plant basement isn't catchy. It's a 5-minute indictment of our entire strategy. He's turning zeolite sandbags into a joke. Enough. Let's focus. His growth is no accident. Tracks like Medusa gift bags. Weaponized creativity. We cannot allow this to spiral into a full-blown PR crisis. Public trust in nuclear is strong. We've emphasized low emissions, energy, reliability. It's worked before. This isn't a crisis. It's a distraction. Oh yes, because low emissions were such a winning narrative post Fukushima. This isn't just a distraction, it's a problem. Our PR strategy hinges on public apathy. If Lucid inspires others, it's over. We're looking at a cultural shift. Maybe we reach out, offer him a consulting role. Bring him into the fold. Are you serious? This guy released Meltdown Queen. He's not consulting, he's dismantling. Then we neutralize him, flood the algorithm with pro-nuclear content. Increase our ad campaigns, and legal needs to draft contingencies. You mean lottery? I mean contingencies. We don't underestimate him again. We underestimated his reach. We thought people didn't care. But now they're singing about Meltdown Queen in their cars. Public indifference was our shield. If that breaks, we lose everything. He's not just making music, he's making people think. That's dangerous. We built our narrative on silence, and now it's cracking. Monitor his channel, neutralize the narrative, silence this disruption.